The story of Sudan and South Sudan is a long and often painful one. For decades, these lands, which were once a single country, have been torn apart by war. The fighting has deep roots. These roots stretch back into differences in culture, in faith, and in how people saw their place in the nation. The north of Sudan was largely Arab and Muslim. The south was home to many different African ethnic groups. Many in the south followed Christian or traditional animist beliefs. These fundamental differences created a divide that politics often made worse. The central government in Khartoum, located in the north, frequently made decisions that people in the south felt ignored their needs and their identity, leading to a growing sense of injustice and a desire for change. This deep-seated tension erupted into open war not once, but twice. The First Sudanese Civil War began in 1955, even before Sudan officially gained its independence from colonial rule in 1956. People in the southern regions felt marginalized. They resisted control from Khartoum, fearing their unique cultures and religious practices would be suppressed. This initial conflict lasted for 17 brutal years. It finally came to an end in 1972 with the Addis Ababa Agreement. This agreement promised the South a degree of autonomy, a measure of self-rule. For a time, there was a fragile peace, but the underlying issues, the core grievances, were never fully resolved, leaving a wound that could easily be reopened. The peace did not last. In 1983, the Second Sudanese Civil War broke out. This conflict was even more devastating than the first. Several factors ignited this new round of fighting. The southern autonomy that had been granted was effectively abolished by the central government. The government in Khartoum also moved to impose Islamic Sharia law across the entire country. This was a significant point of contention for the largely non-Muslim South. Furthermore, the discovery of oil in the southern regions added a powerful economic dimension to the existing political and cultural strife. Control over these valuable resources became a central issue, fueling the conflict for over 2 decades of intense fighting. The Sudan People's Liberation Army and Movement, or SPLA-M, emerged as the main rebel force in the south. They fought against the Sudanese government in a war that caused unimaginable suffering. It is estimated that around 2 million people lost their lives during the Second Sudanese Civil War. Another 4 million people were forced from their homes, becoming refugees in their own land or in neighboring countries. The war was marked by extreme violence, widespread human rights abuses, and the devastation of communities. The scale of the human tragedy was immense, leaving scars on the landscape and on the people that would take generations to heal, if they could heal at all. The fight was fundamentally about identity, resources, and the very soul of the nation. After so much bloodshed and suffering, a major step towards peace was taken. The Comprehensive Peace Agreement, or CPA, was signed on January 9, 2005. This agreement was the result of long and difficult negotiations, mediated by regional bodies like the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and with support from the international community. The CPA was a complex document. It laid out a roadmap for power sharing, wealth sharing, especially concerning oil revenues, and security arrangements. Crucially, it also included a provision for the southern region to hold a referendum on independence after a 6-year interim period. This offered a tangible path towards self-determination for the people of South Sudan. The interim period was one of cautious hope, but also of continued tension. John Garang, the charismatic leader of the SPLA-M, became Sudan's first vice president and the head of the semi-autonomous southern government. Tragically, he died in a helicopter crash just a few months later, in July 2005. Salva Kiir Mayardit then took over the leadership. As the date for the referendum approached, anticipation grew. In January 2011, the people of southern Sudan finally had their say. The result was overwhelming. Nearly 99% of voters chose to break away from Sudan and form their own country. This historic vote was a clear and powerful expression of the South's desire for sovereignty and a new beginning, free from the conflicts of the past. On July 9, 2011, South Sudan officially became the world's newest nation. There were scenes of jubilation in Juba, the new capital. The international community welcomed the birth of South Sudan, and it quickly joined the United Nations and the African Union. There was a sense of optimism that independence would finally bring lasting peace and stability. However, the joy of independence was soon tempered by the harsh realities of nation-building and unresolved issues with Sudan. The CPA had left some critical matters unsettled. These included the exact demarcation of the border, the sharing of oil revenues, as most oil fields were in the south, but pipelines ran through the north, and the status of contested regions like Abyei. These unresolved issues quickly became sources of new conflict. Arguments over oil transit fees led South Sudan to temporarily shut down its oil production in 2012, a drastic move that severely impacted both economies, as they were heavily reliant on oil income. Border skirmishes erupted, particularly around the Heglig oil field, which both countries claimed. The region of Abyei, rich in pasture and also claimed by communities in both Sudan and South Sudan, remained a dangerous flashpoint. Its status was supposed to be decided by a separate referendum, but this never materialized in a way both sides accepted. Citizenship rights for Southerners in Sudan and Northerners in South Sudan also became a complex and emotional problem for many families. While South Sudan grappled with its relationship with Sudan to the north, a new and devastating conflict erupted within its own borders. In December 2013, less than 3 years after independence, political tensions between President Salva Kiir and his former Vice President Riek Machar exploded into open civil war. President Kiir accused Machar of attempting a coup, a charge Machar denied. The conflict quickly took on ethnic dimensions, pitting Kiir's Dinka ethnic group against Machar's Nuer ethnic group, among others. This internal war plunged the new nation into a cycle of violence that proved incredibly destructive, shattering the initial hopes that had accompanied its birth. The civil war in South Sudan brought about a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Millions of people suffered immensely. Many thousands were killed in the fighting, which was often characterized by brutal attacks on civilians, including widespread sexual violence and the recruitment of child soldiers. Entire communities were uprooted, with estimates suggesting that over 4 million people were forced to flee their homes. Some became internally displaced within South Sudan, seeking refuge in overcrowded camps often lacking basic necessities. Others crossed borders into neighboring countries like Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan, becoming refugees and placing a huge strain on host communities and humanitarian organizations trying to provide aid. The conflict had a devastating impact on food security. Widespread insecurity disrupted farming and trade. People were unable to plant or harvest crops, and access to markets became impossible in many areas. As a result, hunger and malnutrition became rampant. Millions faced severe food shortages, and parts of the country experienced famine conditions. International aid agencies struggled to reach those most in need due to the ongoing violence and logistical challenges. The dream of a prosperous and peaceful South Sudan turned into a nightmare of starvation and poverty for a vast portion of its population. The very fabric of society was torn apart by this internal strife, compounding the suffering. Adding to the region's woes, a separate and brutal civil war erupted in Sudan in April 2023. This conflict, primarily between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces, has created one of the world's largest displacement crises. As of mid-2025, over 12 million Sudanese have been displaced, with more than 4 million fleeing into neighboring countries, including South Sudan, which was already struggling. This new wave of refugees has placed an even greater burden on South Sudan's limited resources and fragile infrastructure. The humanitarian situation across the entire region is dire, with reports of famine spreading in Sudan, healthcare systems collapsing, and civilians caught in the crossfire facing unimaginable horrors. Despite the relentless cycle of violence, there have been numerous efforts to bring peace to both Sudan and South Sudan. International and regional actors have played significant roles in trying to mediate these complex conflicts. The Comprehensive Peace Agreement of 2005, which led to South Sudan's independence, was a landmark achievement. Later, after independence and the outbreak of new disputes, further agreements were signed, such as the 2012 Cooperation Agreement. This aimed to address issues like oil transport, trade, and citizenship between Sudan and South Sudan. For South Sudan's internal civil war, several peace deals were negotiated, including the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan in 2018. Organizations like the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development have been at the forefront of these mediation efforts. The United Nations has also been heavily involved, deploying peacekeeping missions like UNMISS in South Sudan and providing critical humanitarian aid. The United States and other international partners have provided diplomatic support and substantial financial assistance. However, implementing these peace agreements has proven incredibly challenging. Ceasefires have often been violated, political will has faltered, and deep-seated mistrust between warring parties has persisted, making sustainable peace a very difficult goal to achieve. The road to peace is often long and fraught with setbacks for these nations. Several key themes underscore the persistent struggles in the region. The heavy dependence of both economies on oil revenues has been a major source of contention. Disputes over the control and sharing of this wealth have consistently fueled conflict. Deep-rooted ethnic tensions, often manipulated for political gain, continue to divide communities and lead to violence. Furthermore, weak governance structures, corruption, and a lack of accountability have hampered development and eroded public trust in institutions. These internal weaknesses make it even harder for peace efforts to take root and for the countries to build stable, prosperous societies for all their citizens. Outside interventions, while often well-intentioned, can also complicate the political landscape. Achieving lasting peace in Sudan and South Sudan remains a formidable challenge as of 2025. The recent civil war in Sudan has added another layer of complexity and suffering to an already fragile region. For a better future, both countries need strong, inclusive leadership committed to reconciliation and good governance. They need to address the root causes of conflict, including economic disparities and ethnic grievances. Building robust institutions, ensuring justice and accountability for past atrocities, and diversifying their economies away from oil dependence are crucial steps. The international community must continue its support, but ultimately, the path to peace must be led and owned by the people of Sudan and South Sudan themselves. Their resilience is undeniable, but the journey ahead is still incredibly hard.